Computer's working slow here. Hold on. Oh, here we go. All right, we're starting the Mishnah. Let's get it up here. A second. Okay, starting the Mishnah that starts. We're continuing in the discussions in the Mishnayos that we had up until now, finding different things in that have comparisons and they're not so, and they're not, and they are comparison, but there's some things that are not. So let's see. We have over here this Mishnah starts with starting with the question about the difference between Sefer Torah and Tefillin and Mezuzahs. The writing of this is not really the place for this discussion about the laws of writing a Sefer Torah or Tefillin, but just gives us it's just like the Rashba says, we're not talking about all the differences. We're discussing some of the differences. We're not going to go so deep into this. And also, even in Megillah itself, about how we write the Megillah and what's considered a kosher Megillah, also this is not really its space. But it says like this, it's really in chapter 2. But we touch on some things here. So, and the question basically over here is, in a Sefer Torah, we have two questions. One is about the laws of writing a Sefer Torah. What is considered a kosher Sefer Torah that you have? For instance, you have a person's obligation that we have to have that each person should write a Sefer Torah. And then what is a kosher Sefer Torah to read from when it comes to the congregation? So there's different questions over here. So he says like this. The Mishnah says, Ein bein Sfarim. No, then. So it says, Ein bein Sfarim, meaning the Sefer Torah. The Tefillin and Mezuzahs, for Tefillin, with regard to Tefillin and Mezuzahs, which are also written on what's called Stam, which means it's also Sefer Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzahs. These are all things that have to be written on some sort of parchment. There's different laws. What type of parchment do you use for the mezuzah? What kind of parchment do we use for the Tefillin and the Sefer Torah? So, but here we're talking about some of the differences. Ein bein Sefarim, the Tefillin Mezuzahs, there's no difference between the Sefer Torah and the Tefillin Mezuzahs. Ella sha'asfarim nichtavim b'chol lashon. The Sefer Torah you could write in any language. We'll see what this means and according to whose opinion. Well, Tefillin and Mezuzahs einin nichtavais ela ashuris. And the Tefillin and Mezuzahs, one could only write in what's called ashuris. Ashuris comes from the word means beautiful, oisher or yosher, straight, or also Ashuris is from Ashur, from the country Ashur. Basically, the Hebrew that we know today. There's two types of Hebrew. In what we found in history, I think I could bring up a picture if my computer's going to be working and fast enough. Okay, look for a second over here. The Ksav Ivris, what was known as Ksav Ivris, was possibly they used at some point before in the first temple. So this would be Ksav Ivris, this picture over here. And Ksav Ashuris is what we're more familiar with, the Aleph Beis, the way we write it now, which would be like on top over here, or like over here. This is the Sefer Torah, how it looks today. So, but once upon a time, the Ksav, the writing of Hebrew, was more like the left-hand top over here. So the Mishnah says that, hey, everyone. So Mishnah says that Tefillin and Mezuzahs have to be written in Ashuris. So Rashi says Ashuris Lashon HaKodesh means not in any other language. And Masfarim means Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim. When you write the Torah, the Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, the three groups of Torah, which are the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, it has to be written in any language. So the question is, are we talking about writing to read from? Are we talking about writing for the halacha of Sefer Torah? We know that a Chumash is different than a Sefer Torah. We know that a Sefer Torah is the 5 books of Moshe. Okay, so over here, Reb Sheinzot says, the later authorities, Rishon LeZion and others, comment that there are many additional differences between the halachas of phylacteries, which is tefillin, and the halachas of Torah scroll. Why are we only mentioning that it has to be written, that Sefer Torah could be written in any language, or Tanakh could be written in any language, and Tefillin Mezuzahs must be written in Ashuris, in Lashon HaKodesh? So the Rashba and the Ritva explain that the dispute that despite the phrasing of the Mishnah, it does not presume to enumerate all the differences between the categories in question. Again, so this is the Rashba teaches us in every Mishnah we've been learning, every Mishnah we've been learning so far, that we're not talking about all the differences, but some of the differences. Okay. He quotes from the Rambam that phylacteries and mezuzahs may be written only in Ashuris, which again, Ashuris is the Hebrew that we have today. Ivris is the Hebrew that they had before the first temple. The question is exactly the source of Ashuris, if it actually came from Ashur. So Reb Sheinzatz is going to give us a bit of an insight. The Hebrew script currently in use is called by the sages Ashuris, which is the Hebrew that we know today. In contrast, in ancient Hebrew script, Ivris, which we showed you before, Ivris is this over here in the top left-hand corner, and we still have today signs of it in different places. So that's called Ivris. So Reb Sheinzatz says Ivris used by the Samaritans, by the Shamronim, which still kind of small groups of them today. The Shamronim were those people that came to fill the space of the North Kingdom after the North Kingdom was exiled by Sancheriv. The sages disagreed as to why the script is called Ashuris. What's the word Ashuris mean? Some explain that it is because the Jews brought it with them when they returned from Babylonian exile, which included Assyria. Again, so from the word Ashur, Ashur is which ancient Assyria, which was Nineveh, etc. Others explain that is from the word of happiness, Oisher is happy, or Yosher, meaning straight. So straightforward. And the ancient Hebrew script is still used by the Shamronim today. The image, I'll show you the image that he means to show in a second. There keeps a street sign in the Holy Land with the Shamronim, which has a Shamronim community. The top line of the sign is written in Ashuris and the bottom line is in Ivris. So what he means to say is he doesn't have it here online, but he has it on his app. If you, it says over here, we see there's a street sign in Israel, which I guess it's a street sign in a city that has some Shamronim there. So it has Rachov ben Amram, in this is our writing, this would be Ashuris. And the bottom over here, I guess it says also ben Amram, is Ivrit. So you see how different, for instance, if you didn't know that this on top it said Rachov ben Amrai, you would have a hard time reading this in the bottom, which means Rachov ben Amram. So you see how different the writing of ancient Ivrit was with Ashuris. Okay, so but either way, the Tefillin mezuzahs must be written in Ashuris. We're still in the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, sorry, I'm sounding a little far. Af bisfarim la yitiru sheyichtevu al yivanis. He disagrees, and the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. You can't write the Sefer Torah in any writing. The only one that it's permitted to write in the only other language is Greek, and we'll learn later why. So ancient Greek is the only other language that they could write a Sefer Torah because of the story of Talmud Megillah, the miracle that happened when in the middle of the Second Temple, 72 rabbis were taken to translate the Chumash by force, so to say, or they had no choice. Today, soft force to translate the Chumash into Greek, and so there was a miracle that happened, and because of that miracle, we are allowed to still write the Sefer Torah in Greece. Now, there's many questions that come up in this discussion because we have Megillah, we have different languages. You're not allowed to read, for instance, by heart. But so when you're reading, people could write. If you go to if you buy an English Hebrew Siddur, right? So there'll be parts that will translate the English Hebrew to the English, and there'll be parts that will write out the Hebrew in English. Meaning, let's say there's something that you have to do in public, like let's say make a blessing on the Torah, right? So no one wants to make the blessing on the Torah in English, so you read it in Hebrew. How do you read in Hebrew if you can't really read Hebrew well? So the English Siddurim have made that the Hebrew that the Hebrew, you could write the Hebrew in English. It means you pronounce the actual Hebrew words, but it's reading in English, or vice versa. You could write in Hebrew in another language. So the question is, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about using the letters? And that's really discussed in the second chapter. Whether if you're writing in the actual letters, the alphabet of the other language, or you're writing it in Hebrew with the pronunciation of another language. Okay. Af bisvarim lo yitiru lahem lashon acher chutz milashon hakodesh. So Rab Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees. He says that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees. He says that even for the three Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, you cannot write it in any other language aside for lashon hakodesh or Greece. The Yavanis of Gemara in Parish time, the Gemara is going to teach us why. Okay. So just again, in the Mishnah itself, there's a lot of commentaries on it about the question is this Sefer Torah that even the Tanakama, the Ramban, there's a lot of people that take from this Mishnah different understandings. Like what are we talking about a Sefer Torah that we're reading from in the community by the shul, or are we talking about a Sefer Torah to write? The very fact that we're including in the Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim, you see, we're not just talking about the Torah itself. Are we talking about, so when we read a Sefer Torah, are we allowed to read from one of these Sefer Torahs according to the Tanakama that's not written in Lashon HaKodesh and Ashuris? So there's a lot of discussion on this. Again, this is not really its place, so we're not going to go too deep into this. Again, also the idea, the what is Ashuris and what Ashuris, etc. All right, let's go see Rashi. Rashi says the Toifrim Begidin, Gemara. But if you want to, when you tie you tie the parchment in a Sefer Torah, right? So a Sefer Torah is not made out of one cow. It has a lot of different amudim, a lot of different pages, right? So the pages have to be tied together. That's a Sefer Torah is one scroll. How do you tie this scroll together? You have to use gidin. You have to use they use the Snoozy calls them, we call it the Giddim, were the dried out veins that they use in order to tie the Sefer Torah. Or the Tamis Yadayim. What about, we learned before that Kisvei Kodesh, things of holiness, make the hands impure because we didn't want people to touch the Sfarim and then touch Truma, right? So that Zev is Hashavim, they're all equal. The Gemara says, "L'tayfer megidin kol sifrei masuim begilyon v'alachal meishim sinai betfilin umezuzos sheyeh tfurim begidin." So here Rashi says a chiddush. What does he say? He says that all the Sefer Torahs were written on a like even the tefillin has, you have to sometimes tie them together. So is called Sefer Torahs begilyon v'alachal meishim sinai. The law from Moshe came down from Sinai. Then tefillin mezuzos, you have to write them. You can't just use string or thread. You have to use gidin, specifically dried out arteries. But in the Tractate of Makdes, we discussed, does the Sefer Torah also require to have dried out arteries, or is it also good to use flax or other kind of materials? The Sefer Torah should tough from the Pishtan. In the Gemara Makdes asks, what happens if you tied it together with linen? You use linen threads. Hashta Ashmina and Nasnisin command the puzzle. So from our Mishnah, the Rashi says, it seems that it wouldn't be kosher, even though there's a discussion in the Tractate of Makdes. There's a Tractate of Makdes. There's a discussion about if you can use threads for linen threads for a Sefer Torah. Here it seems simple that you have to use gidin. Okay, so this Rashi actually is not so simple. Why is this Rashi not so simple? Because Rashi says something that's if one catches the eye, he mentions the word mezuzah. Anyone who's seen a mezuzah knows that a mezuzah is like a square or a bit of a rectangle piece of parchment that is one piece of parchment. There's no two pieces of parchment that you tie together. So why is Rashi even including mezuzah in the laws of Gidin? It should just be talking about tefillin. So from here, some people learn that Rashi is of the opinion that if you were to take two pieces of parchment and tie them together with Gidin, and then write a mezuzah on it, it would be kosher. You can't do it afterwards. You can't take two pieces of parchment and tie it together. But from Rashi, it seems that if you would put together a piece of parchment by combining two smaller pieces with sewing it together with the dried out arteries, the Gidin, it would be kosher. So that's why Rashi, some people learn from Rashi, that's what he means. Okay. The Gemara continues. If we're able to just get through this Mishnah today and cover some ground, it'll be nice. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. So the Gemara asks the question like this: Raminu, are you allowed to write the Sefer Torah in any language? Mikra shekas v'targum. We find that now here's a brisa that we have to remember this brisa because we're going to stick with this brisa until the next Mishnah. The brisa says Mikra, something that should be written in Mikra, which would mean Hebrew or Lashon HaKodesh. Shekas v'targum, that you wrote it in its translation. We'll see an example. The Targum, or something that was supposed to be written in Targum. Shekasve Mikra, you wrote it in its Hebrew. Uksav Ivri, or the Ivrit Ksav, like we said before. Einem Tamis Yadayim doesn't make the hands impure. I mean, it's not considered proper holy articles. That because we said that anything Sifrei Kodesh makes the hands impure. Remember, you have to remember the rabbis instituted that when you touch those days, again, they had people that had truma meisers, you had things how to stay sanctified. So they didn't want people to be, they wanted people to be careful not to leave. People were leaving the truma with their svarim, and then it was bringing mice and it was eating up the Sefer Torah. So they wanted basically to keep keep the library clean, right? Everyone says don't eat over my books, so just keep the library clean. So one of the ways of keeping the library clean was to say if you're going to be touching the books, your hands are going to be impure, so don't touch food. So the question is, but if you didn't apply that, we realized we discussed it already. Not all of the books are considered are considered holy, and one of the signs now. So the rabbis did it as a way to protect the truma, to protect the sanctity of the tithings. But via it we learn what's considered kisvei kodesh. Because now we have a question: does a Megillah we learn? Does a Megillah make your hands impure? Did the book of Mishlei make their hands impure? From this we learn we could use this as a sign what's considered kisvei kodesh. So the Brisa says that if you wrote things that are in the Torah that's supposed to be written in Hebrew or written in Unkelis, in Aramaic, and something that's supposed to be written in Aramaic is written in Hebrew, Lashon Kodesh. So he says, Uksav Ivri, if you write today, Uksav Ashuris, Einem Tamis Yadayim, doesn't make the hands impure. Means it's not considered Kisvei Kodesh. It's like almost like writing a Chumash, right? So he says, it has to be written in present Lashon HaKodesh, not the ancient one like the Shamronim use, and it has to be written on a sefer properly with the parchment, ubedyai with proper ink. Yes, Jonathan.
How come when you touch your shoes, right, your hands are tummy? How come your hands get tummy?
Say that again?
How come when you touch it, how come your hands get tummy or impure by touching your shoes? When you touch your shoes, don't wash your hands.
This is not the subject, the place for this. We want to stay on course. But in general, we're talking about not just that you have to do a quick washing, but we're talking about making your hands impure of actually making, because anything you touch, your feet are on the ground. You could be stepping on things that are tamei. So therefore, you have to wash your hands. It's like if you touch your shoes during davening, you have to wash your hands. But it's not the place for this discussion. Okay, so the Gemara the Rashi says like this: Mikra shekosef targum. Sefer shekosef lashon hakodesh aroy lichtay mikra kosef lashon rami. Where you're supposed to write something in Hebrew, you write it in Aramaic. V'targum roy lichtay v'targum kigoyin yigar shadusa. Right? We have when Lavan meets Yaakov at the end of Vayetze. So it says over there that they made this gal, they made this heap, and each one Lavan called it yigar shadusa, and Yaakov called it gal eid. So yigar shadusa is not Hebrew. So Yigar Shadusa, if it's Sefer Torah, if you can't write Gal Eid, you can't write the translation of Yigar Shadusa. If you do, then it's not considered Sefer Torah. It's considered like a Chumash. Kosev Mikra Gal Eid. If you wrote Gal Eid instead of writing Yigar Shadusa, okay, going Targum Kosev Shal Daniel VaEzra. Anyone who opens up Daniel or Ezra, Nehemiah, it's all written in Aramaic. So if you don't write it in its proper language, it's not considered written properly. Because Ksav Ivri. What's ksav rivi? You didn't change the language. You wrote the Hebrew, but you used the different alphabet. You used the alphabet of Ivri. Shekasav ksav shal ever hanar. Ivri means from the other side of the river. Masechta Sanhedrin kari leksava livuna. So it's the Ivri, which we know today. Like I showed you the picture again. This is a sign over here on the bottom over here of Rechov ben Amram 16 in Israel. This on the bottom. This bottom line is ksav Ivris. Right, that's a ksav that they used. Not sure when they used. It's not clear when they used it, but definitely it's not kosher for Sefer Torah presently. Some people hold that the question is what was the original Sefer Torah written. Right, when we talk about the original Sefer Torah, is it written in ksav Ivris or ksav Ashuris? Did Ashuris only start with Ezra, the Sofer, the scribe? There's a lot of discussion about. Again, this is not the place for it. A lot of discussion when Ashuris started. But most people like to believe that Ashuris was always, like for instance, the Moshe Rabbeinu wrote a Sefer Torah. Did he write it in Ksav Ivris or Ksav Ashuris? So we want to assume that he did everything was Ashuris, which is the alphabet we have today, the square letters. The only point, the difference is that they were forgetful in the time of the destruction of the first temple. Okay, so let's skip the Tosfos. Okay, let's go further. Mikra Shekasiv Targum, the scroll in which Aramaic verses is written in Hebrew, or a Hebrew verse is written in Aramaic, or a verse is written in ancient Hebrew script, which is Ivris, does not render the hands impure. Means it's not real Sefer Torah. It does not. It does so only if the scrolls are written in Ashuris on parchment and ink. And the Rambam quotes this opinion, this brisa. So this brisa says that you can't write a Sefer Torah b'chol lashon. So why could we say? So the question is, how do we say in our Mishnah, according to the Tanakama, according to the original opinion of the Mishnah, that you could write a Sefer Torah, means the Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim in any language. What did we say in the Mishnah? You could write it in any Shesvarim Nichtam Chol Lashon. You could write it in all Lashon. You don't have to write a Shuris, right? So Rav is going to answer this question. But hold on one second. I want to see if this was one of the Tosfos, and I did want to learn. Actually, this is short Tosfos. We'll learn it. Later, at the end of the Gemara, we're going to learn that this brisa is talking about a Megillah. The Gemara is going to give different answers, and the final answer is going to be we're talking about a Megillah. The Kasha, we say later in Perek Sheni in the second chapter, giftis the giftim. Giftis is a kind of language. Ilmis le ilmim, another kind of language. Yatsa means if you read in other languages the Megillah for that population, that means the people that know that language, then they're considered as if they heard the Megillah. You have to say that the Megillah was written in Giftis or Ilmis, let's say English to people that speak English. It means the actual Megillah was written in English. Why do you like it? Have a karabapeh? And if not, that means if it was written in Hebrew, in Lashon HaKodesh, and they're articulating it in English, that means they're reading by heart because they're not reading what it says. But you said you're not allowed to read a Megillah by heart. So why would it not make the hands impure? It's a kosher Megillah. Because you're allowed to write the Megillah in the language that people understand. Tosfos answers something interesting. When you have a unique language, the question is if English is considered today. If you go to France, they would say it's a unique language. The Americans will say, or the English will say, English is a universal language, right? The French, if you get lost in Argentina and you don't know if you don't have your Google Translate on you and you don't speak Spanish, no one speaks English over there. And if you go to France, even if they do speak English, they'll pretend like they don't speak English. So the question is if we're talking about unique languages or universal languages. But it seems like the Torah considers anything not Hebrew as a unique language, not a universal language. So the Gemara answers, since you can only read it to the crowd that understands the language, is din then it's not considered sanctified enough to make the hands impure, because it's not your typical Megillah. It's only used in certain communities. But if it's written in Lashon HaKodesh, it's kashera af l'shein makirim. Then even someone who doesn't understand Lashon HaKodesh, they fulfill their obligation of hearing the Megillah. Therefore, it makes the hands impure. So we see clearly that there's different laws in different situations. We're trying to talk about the most important part of the Megillah. That Megillah, the way it's written properly, it has to be written in Ashuris, on di, with ink, on a parchment, and then it's considered sanctified kedusha, that it makes the hands impure. But Rav is now going to first, before we get to the answer that's Megillah, Rav is going to try to explain it in a different way. So Rav says it's not a question. What do you mean it's not a question? It's not a question of a contradiction between our Mishnah that says you could write a sefer, the Sfarim, the Tanakh, in any language, and the Brisa that says it has to be written in Ashuris, and it has to be written with ink, and it has to be written in the language it should be written in. So the Gemara answers, "Kan v'gufei shalanu, kan v'gufei shalahem." In our Mishnah, we're talking about when you wrote it Ashuris, you wrote it in the right language, the guf. You wrote languages, but the Bryce is talking about where you wrote it in the actual alphabet. Let's say you wrote it in English. So again, you could write Hebrew. I could use languages of Hebrew have 22 letters. The 22 letters make different sounds, most of them, right? If you go to a Sephardi community, there's a difference between an ayin and an aleph, right? So there's basically 22 letters, which makes different sounds. You could make any sound. You can make a sound of any language. I could write Hebrew that sounds Chinese. It means I could write. I could pronounce if I know how to pronounce the words that I'm trying to say, then it would sound like I'm reading Mandarin. So it's talking about the question is our Mishnah says you could write it in Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, but it could be in a different language. And over there in the Bryce is talking about we wrote it in English or Russian or other alphabet. The ksiva, gufa means the ksiva, the writing. Kan begufa shalanu masnisim diktani bechol lashon shleishines eksav. You didn't change the language. It's in Lashon HaKodesh. El sheshines halashon ubraisa begufan shalanu. You changed how to read it. You're not pronouncing Hebrew words. You're pronouncing English or Mandarin, whatever. But the Bryce is talking about you wrote it in another alphabet. Abai says, if that's the case, so if you're talking about that you wrote it in their alphabet, so why does it say in the Brisa? Then in a case of what does it mean that you wrote Hebrew, you wrote in Targum, you wrote the Lashon HaKodesh, you said in Targum, and Targum you wrote in Lashon HaKodesh. I feel a mikra, shekasiv mikra. Targum shekasiv Targum nami. Daktani ashi yichtiv ashur al sefer Torah. So what the Brisa says that if you make a mistake, if you write Yigal Shadusa, and instead you write Gal Eid, that's a problem. What are we talking about? And there's anyways a problem. The problem is the alphabet's wrong. So why do you have to say that you wrote, you pronounced the words wrong? You wrote the whole language, the alphabet's wrong, so it's a problem from the beginning. If you say that we're writing in Lashon HaKodesh and you wrote the words of, you used the Lashon HaKodesh words and letters, and then you wrote out Gal Eid instead of Yigal Shodusa, means you wrote the Hebrew translation, not the Aramaic translation, then we can understand. But if anyways you're using the wrong alphabet, we have a problem in the beginning. So how could you say the Bryce is talking about that they use a different alphabet? So then I said no. That our Brisa, our Mishnah is the opinion of the rabbis. The Brisa goes according to our opinion of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, which Reb Shimon ben Gamliel we learned in our Mishnah says that a Sefer Torah also has to be written can only be written in Ashuris, but it also says, but aside for Greek. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, the polygar about the Brisa goes according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. So the Gemara says, how can you say it goes according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel? Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, our Brisa says no language could be written for the Sefer Torah aside for the proper Hebrew. Ashuris, not even Ivris. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says you could write it in Greek. So obviously the Brisa can't be Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Ela loikash is not a question. Kam v'sfarim, kam v'tfilim mezuzos. Our Mishnah is talking about, it's not a difficulty. The Mishnah is referring to Torah scrolls, and the Brisa is talking about tefillin mezuzos. So tefillin mezuzos has to be. Our Mishnah also agrees that tefillin mezuzos have to be written in Ksav Ashuris. So therefore, the Brisa doesn't say if it's referring to tefillin mezuzos or if it's talking about Sefer Torah. So therefore, we could say the Brisa is just referring to tefillin mezuzos, which would be in agreement with the Sefer, with the Mishnah. Okay. So the Rashi just says that Reb Shimon Gamliel. Why does it say it has to be written in proper Hebrew? You could write it in Greek. So the Gemara says you can't say it's talking about our Brisa is talking about tefillin mezuzos. Why can't we say the Brisa again? Let's just in case for people to hold what you say in Hebrew, hold cup, right? So you have two opinions. We have the Mishnah and the Brisa. Our Mishnah, the Mishnah that's in our Gemara, in our Mishnais says the only difference between Sfar, meaning Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, the Tanakh, and how you write the Tefillin mezuzos, again the Rashba says there's many other differences, is that the Sefer Torah can be written in any language, and Tefillin mezuzos must be written in Ksav Ashuris, what we know as the Hebrew that we know today. It means the Lashon HaKodesh that we know today. It means it's the way we know a Sefer Torah today. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says he disagrees with the Mishnah, with the first opinion of the Mishnah. He says it has to be written in Ashuris, aside for Greece. You could write it in Greek. We have a Brisa. The Brisa says everything must be written properly. You have to write Hebrew. You have to write the Targum, and the Targum means the actual words have to be written properly, and it has to be written in Ashuris. Doesn't give any space for Greece, and doesn't give any space for anything else. So we said, so what's the Brisa talking about? So first, you wanted to answer the differences in the actual alphabet. So you can't say alphabet. So then you say want to talk about the difference in. So what's the difference now? It's a difference. That's the difference between Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and our Mishnah. The Tanakama. The Tanakama is our Mishnah, and the Brisa goes into according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. That you can't either say because Rabbi Shimon Gamliel allows to write in Greek, and the Brisa says no language besides for Hebrew. So now we want to say, what's that difference? The difference is that the Brisa doesn't say what it's talking about, what kind of writings it's talking about. So let's just say the Brisa is talking about it's writing Tefillin and Mezuzahs. And Tefillin and Mezuzahs, everyone agrees you have to write them only in Lashon HaKodesh. Hold on a second. I just want to say something interesting. The Gemara could have answered when the Gemara said that our Mishnah, that the Brisa can't be Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, because Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says you could write in Greek. The Gemara could have said, the Mishnah could have said, one second, we could still say that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that you have to write, you could write in the pronunciation of Greek in Ksav Ashuris. And then the Brisa could go according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, right? Because if the Brisa just says you have to write, the letters have to be Hebrew letters. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says you could write Hebrew letters in the pronunciation of Greek. So maybe that's what, maybe then the Brisa goes according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, but the Mishnah, the Gemara doesn't answer that. From this, the Ritva says we learn that according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, you literally could write a Sefer Torah in ancient Greek letters. Not just that the letters are Hebrew with the pronunciation in Greek, but the actual Greek letters. Because otherwise we could have answered that answer. So obviously even the Gemara, at no point did the Gemara understand Rabbi Shimon Gamliel to think. And it's based on the story, that he actually wrote it in Hebrew, that you could write it in Hebrew with the translation of, with the pronunciation of Greek. So the Gemara says, so that's back to the Gemara. Tefillin mezuzahs my time. Why mishum nechsiv b'hu v'hayu? What's the halachic reason? Why do you have to write tefillin and mezuzahs only in ksav ashuris, only in Hebrew, what we call Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh? Because the pasuk says in tefillin v'hayu, it says in Shema v'hayu, b'hav yasin you, they should be as they are. You have to write them properly. So, but the Gemara asks question: my targum shekasvu mikra. But the problem is that the tefillin it's not a whole Sefer Torah. Tefillin only has certain little parts of the chumash in it, right? The mezuzah is Shema Yisrael and V'haya, right? So there's no targum in there. There's no words in the mezuzah or the tefillin that you could write in that you could write Lashon HaKodesh, but you could pronounce it in targum. Or you could write it in the actual translation of the Targum, which is Lashon HaKodesh. There is no Targum in the mezuzahs. My Targum, my Targum shekasvu mikra ika bishlei matari ika yigashadusa. The Gemara says in the Torah we have words that are not Hebrew in the Torah. The word, see, if you look at it now, the word yigar shahadusa, right? It's written in Hebrew alphabet, but it's not Hebrew words. Yigar shahadusa is Aramaic for Lavan's heap of stones. But what halachic my targumika? There is no targum in the Mezuzah and the Megillah. So what's the Brisa talking about? You have to make sure to write the targum and the mikra. There is no targum. There's nothing else. I mean, to write the mikra targum that you could say, but there's no. It means if you write the Shema Yisrael in Hebrew letters, but instead of writing Shema Yisrael, you write the Aramaic translation of Shema Yisrael. Okay, that you're not allowed to do. But what are you supposed to be writing Aramaic in a mezuzah that the Bryce is telling you not to write it in Lashon HaKodesh, write it in Aramaic. There's no words in the mezuzah that's Aramaic sounding. V'hayu advarim eilach chsiv b'tefillin mezuzah shekoisvim and pashis shel Shema. All right, let's skip this Tosfos. So I just want to say there's some people that want to learn that the word totafos, we don't know what the word totafos means. Totafos is not a Hebrew word. Totafos, that's how the Gemara learns. How do we know that? How do we know that a person has to have four sections, there's four parshas, there's four portions of the Torah that go into the tefillin, right? If you ever open up a tefillin shalosh, the head tefillin, the inside of a tefillin shalosh is not an open box. It has four compartments in it, and in each one of the compartments you have a special part of the Torah that goes into that, and that's why when you say there's Rashi tefillin, Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, a lot the differences in the different types of tefillin is how do you organize the parshas? What parsha comes first? And the Shalyad also has four parshas, but it's on one piece of parchment. But the four pieces of parchment that are divided. So hasn't the words? How do we know you're supposed to have four parchments? So toit and feis, from the word toit to feis, the Gemara learns. But what's toit to feis mean? It's not really a Hebrew word. So maybe that's what it means, the Aramaic. Some people asked about that question. Okay, who brings that down? Who brought that down? So here, Mar Targum, because the Pnei Yeshua explains. Oh, here, this is where I started. The Pnei Yeshua explains that it was possible to say, according to some Tanoim, that the word totafot, that's in the Shema, that refers to the phylacteries donned on the head, is in a foreign language. Totafot is not Hebrew, and therefore it would be possible to translate it to whatever totafot would be, however you would translate totafot in Lashon HaKodesh. Again, remember that what we're talking about. There's two questions here. There's writing Hebrew or Lashon HaKodesh in Lashon HaKodesh letters. There's writing Lashon HaKodesh in foreign letters. Like if you open an English Chumash, it teaches you how to make a bracha. There's writing English, let's say, or Greek in Hebrew letters, and there's writing Greek in Greek letters. These are all the questions. Then there's also words in the Torah that are not Hebrew, like Totafot, according to the Pnei Yeshua, or Yigashadusa, clearly is not Hebrew. It's not a Hebrew word. Because the Pasuk says that Yaakov called it Galed, and Lavan called it Yigashadusa. But nevertheless, we write Yigashadusa using Hebrew letters. Okay, so that you have to make sure you can't write Yigashadusa in another language or in the Lashon HaKodesh language. So we still have a question. So therefore, we can't say, we could have answered like the Pnei Yeshua Totafos, but we didn't. So we have still a question. We have a Brisa and a Mishnah, and the Brisa seems to contradict the Mishnah. Our Mishnah says you could write a Sefer Torah in any language, according to the first opinion, according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, you could write it in Lashon HaKodesh or Greek, and according to the Ritva, you could even write it in Greek letters. And we have a Brisa that says a Sefer Torah, seemingly it's talking about a Sefer Torah, has to be written in Ksav Yishur, only in Lashon HaKodesh. So who's that? It's a contradiction. How does that work? So Gemara says no kasha. Kam b'Megillah, kam b'Sfarim. The Brisa is talking about a Megillah, and our Mishnah is talking about the regular Sefer Torah. Megillah my time. Why does a Megillah have to be written? Why is a Megillah more strict than a Sefer Torah? That the Megillah has to be written only in Lashon Ashuris, in the present Lashon HaKodesh alphabet and parchment and yai, because we have a pasuk that says Kichsav v'milch shainam. We find many times in the Megillah referring to proper writing. You have to write things in its proper way, right? Even when Achashverosh, Haman, Mordechai, Esther, when they sent edicts out to the kingdom, they wrote it properly. It means they wrote it. See, right? So the Megillah writes, for instance, when Haman the Rasha sent out his decree to murder all the Jews. So he had to send letters. It says he sent letters to all the 120 kingdoms of Achashverosh. Not everyone spoke Persian, right? There was Hodu. There was people in India. There was Kush, people in Africa. They didn't all speak Persian. So they wrote it Kichsavam Ulchshainam. He wrote it in the writing and the language of each country. When Esther Mordechai wrote letters that gave permission for the Jews to defend themselves, also to write it in their language, in their alphabet and their language. So clearly the Megillah is very particular about writing everything properly. My targum shekasve mikrika. So the question is, where is there Where is there Aramaic in the Megillah? So now the Gemara says, Rapapa says, V'nishma piskom hamelech. And when the king's decree, piskom is decree. Piskom, they say, is not Hebrew. It's an Aramaic or Persian word. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omer v'chol hanashim yitnu yikar lebayleihem. All the wives will give honor. Yikar is not a Hebrew word. It's either, let's say, Aramaic or Persian. So those are words that are not Lashon HaKodesh, and if you translate them into their proper Lashon HaKodesh word, then the Megillah is not kosher. Hold on a second. I wanted to see if we want to jump into the Tosfos a second. Again. All right. We're going to skip this Tosfos because it's, again, we're talking about things that come up later in the second paragraph. All right. Rav Ashi Amar, and Rav Ashi goes back and he says that he gives another answer. He gives, means to explain the difference between the Brisa and the Mishnah. Ahi b'shar sfarim, that we're talking about, that the Brisa is also talking about Sifrei Tanakh. For Rabbi Huda, it's an opinion of Rabbi Huda. What's this mean? The Tanya, we learned, Tefillin and mezuzahs ein nichtavim el ashuris. It's brought down that Tefillin and a mezuzah must be written in ashuris. Again, ashuris is modern, what we know today as Lashon HaKodesh. Rabbi Seinu hitiru yivanis. Our rabbis have allowed for people to write it in Greek as well. V'hachsiv v'hayu. How could you write the Tefillin and mezuzahs in Greek? It says v'hayu. It has to be written as havyasan, as they should be, which is Hebrew. You have to add in, not that the Tefillin and mezuzahs could be written in all languages, but the Tanakh can be written in all languages. Yavanis Greek. For Rabbi Seinu Hitu Yavanis, they said you've hitiru miklal the Tanakh Aser. So we see that it says the rabbis allowed for the Sefer Torah to be written in Greek. Means that the initial opinion is that you can't. So what's the Brisa again? Tefillin mezuzahs ein nichtavim el ashuris. Rabbi Seinu hitiru yivanis is talking about the Sefer Torah, and which means that the Tanakh holds you can't write it, even a Sefer Torah yivanis. Michlal Tanakh sav bitmi v'Tanakh shari b'chol lashon. So we have to say Rabbi Seinu leitiru shichtu el yivanis. Tanya, that you have to say that instead of it saying that Rabbi Seinu hitiru yivanis means that it's the Tanna Kama holds you can write in all languages, and the rabbi said it's only to be written in Greek. You can't write in another language like Rav Shimon Gamliel Nar Mishnah. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda says afkish hitiru Rabbi Seinu yivanis la yitiru el b'Sefer Torah, and the Rabbi Yehuda says that when you could write Yavanis is only by Sefer Torah. Megillah can't be written in Yavanis. Which would be that our Brisa that we learned initially goes according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Seinu Omer, that's Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Although the sanctity of Sefer Torah surpasses all other books, since there was a unique miracle, like we're going to learn, specifically with regard to the translation of the Torah, it is permitted to write the Torah in Greek. However, other books translated into Greek do not have the status of sacred text. Only a Sefer Torah does. Why did we allow people to write in the Sefer Torah in Greek? Mishamais is the Talmud Megillah, because it's the story of Talmud Megillah. Who's Talmud Megillah? Talmud Megillah, I believe, is when Alexander the Greek was died, murdered, when he passed away, and they divided his kingdom into four. So North Africa with Eretz Yisrael was under the rule of Talmud. Until I think later till the story of Hanukkah. I think by Hanukkah already, the Assyrian or the Syrian Greeks kind of took over Eretz Yisrael. That's when we had that fight. That's why the story of Hanukkah happens later on. But what's the story of Talmud HaMelech? Talmud HaMelech, the Tanya, Ma'aseh b'Talmud HaMelech. Now, Talmud HaMelech was a scholar. We know that the great wisdom that he had in Alexandria and the great wisdom that he appreciated Sfarim, Talmud HaMelech wasn't necessarily an anti-Semite. I mean, we don't consider him to be one of the anti-Semites on the list, but he was still a ruler and he wanted things done. So Talmud HaMelech, once Kinois, he gathered, it's a famous Gemara, Shivim Ushnaim Zkenim. He took 72 elders. From here we learn that 72 elders is the Sanhedrin with the Av Bezdin and the Nasi. That's the number 72. He put them into 72 different homes. They didn't tell them why. He just took the elders of Israel and he put them into the Sanhedrin and he put them in isolation. There was no cell phones, no communication between each home. He didn't tell them why he put them into these homes. So Talmud HaMelech himself came in to each one of the elders privately and told them, I want you to translate Torah's Moshe, the Torah of Moshe, into Greek. Now the problem was that because of Greek philosophy and paganism and how they viewed Judaism, there was a lot of concern that if he would translate the Chumash literally, it would be misused. Literally, today, if you want to waste time and go on podcasts of anti-Semites, they're always trying to mistranslate the Chumash, right? Esther is a book of genocide. Everyone's trying to find different ways to manipulate an agenda with what the Jewish people hold as sacred Torah. And therefore, the rabbis were very concerned that there is going to be the translation, if they literally translate the Torah into Greek, it's going to be manipulated to be misunderstood to prove different things that are anti-Jewish. The problem is that there were 72 rabbis in 72 different rooms. So how could they change things or adjust things to be understood properly without literally translating it and not making a fool out of themselves? Because if they would come out with 72 different versions of the Torah, Talmud HaMelech would know that they're not being honest. God put into every single one of them wisdom, and they all, on their own, understood how to make different changes in the Torah. This is a Shver Gemara. Why is it a Shver Gemara? The whole story is Shver. The Gemara, they say that the world went into darkness for 3 days after this. It was not a good story, but it seemed like it had to happen. That was like kind of a breakthrough of bringing the Torah into to be understood in the world. Although Joshua did it as well, but here Moshe wrote it in 70 languages. So but that's another Gemara for another place. Moshe translated, but Moshe did it then on his own. Here they had to translate in Greek and they were put on the spot. So they all agreed. They all agreed how to change it. Now, Talmud Melech Mitzvah. If I'm not mistaken, the Cleopatra, all that are descendants of Talmud HaMelech. So though today, I don't know what today the Egyptians are today, but Talmud HaMelech was Greek because Alexander the Great conquered the whole world. But Rashi says he was an Egyptian king because eventually that all the images we have Cleopatra and all that's Greek. That's Egyptian Greek. It's not the pure Egyptian. The pure Egyptian, the pharaohs, even the pharaohs later, that's not the same pharaohs of ancient times. The pharaohs of the first temple were also not the pharaohs of ancient time because the Egyptians that we had in time of Yitzis Mitzrayim also weren't. They were all destroyed. So King Talmud HaMelech, the king. This is the king of Egypt, Ptolemaeus II, who ruled over Egypt during the years 246-285 BCE. He inherited the kingdom, which includes Eretz Yisrael and parts of North Africa, from his father, Ptolemy I. After his succession to the throne, he worked to establish and organize the kingdom in various ways. He was known as an admirer of culture and science, and during his region, Alexandria developed into This footnote is not accurate. It's missing some parts. Both the Talmud, there's a printing mistake over here. Either way, and attribute this initiative to translate the Torah into Greek to King Ptolemy. Apparently, he showed interest in Eretz Yisrael and had a friendly relationship with the Jews. He renamed the ancient city of Rabat On, which is modern day Amman, Philadelphia, after himself. The city of Ptolemais near Akko, I don't know if that's still a city, he was also named for him. So he was a person that was a cultural, but he wanted things done in his way. What were the differences that they made? Well, basically, the Gemara is going to say, why are we allowed to translate Greek only? Is because Greek is for this miracle. What did they write? First pasuk they changed. The first pasuk of the Torah is Bereshis bara Elokim. Bereshis, in the beginning, God created. But they didn't want that. There's many ways to misunderstand this verse, because you could also understand that Bereshis created Elokim. So therefore, they changed it and he wrote Elokim bara Bereshis, that God in the beginning created. Second verse they changed was, of course, when God talks plurally. Why is he talking plurally? Is there someone else there? If he's only God, if we say Hashem Echad, so why is the plural? So when we say Nasa Adam B'Tzalmeinu, let's make man in our image. What's this plural? They changed it to Esa Adam B'Tzelem B'Dmus. I will make man into his form and image. So they took out, again, they were taking out, what they were trying to get at was to preserve Hashem Echad, the oneness of God. So if you're going to say Bereshis bara Elokim, so Bereshis is another deity, another energy that created Elokim. So even though they say that the question is that you could the translation of Bereshis in Greek would be in the beginning. He would understand beginning doesn't mean God. But they say that they felt that the Greeks would feel that your first word has to start with God. Again, you could have, and this is, by the way, the lesson that we learn hold on, Jonathan. The lesson we learned from this Gemara is, from this story, as dangerous as this story was, because they could have, how did they know what the next person was going to translate? But we see that a lot of people get engaged in arguing. And there's certain times you argue, and certain times you just need to set the issue straight. So if over here the issue was that they wanted to prove or disprove the oneness of God, so you could sit there arguing about it. Nasan b'Talmeinu really means that God humbles himself to as if he's talking to the angels. Then it leaves it open for translation. Either the person accepts it or doesn't accept it. So just change the wording so there's no place for misunderstanding. Yes, again, it's very dangerous, but that's one of the ways to deal with issues. Yes, Jonathan.
You're not allowed to teach Torah to a guy, so how were they able to translate the Torah into Greek?
Say that again?
You're not allowed to teach Torah to a guy, so how were they able to translate it into Greek and everything, and making all the, they're saying the words backwards and all that stuff, right? Or
okay, so that's a very good question. First of all, there's a discussion if Torah B'Ksav is something that can't be taught to Gentiles. Number two is especially parts that have to do with God's unity, which everyone, Shayichad Vamuna, for instance, in Tanya is taught also to Gentiles. Another thing is they weren't given much choice. He didn't ask them if they would like to. He said they have to. Okay, Elokim bara Bereshis. That's
also and also like Julie, she wrote some very amazing things in the chat and interesting and cool things in the chat. Julie wrote, if you see it in the chat there.
We'll get it. We'll get it at the end before we finish. We'll go through all the chats.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks, sure.
I don't think I saw it in the chat. Maybe in the WhatsApp.
No. It's in the chat. It's in the Zoom chat.
In the Zoom chat, I see John. I see. Oh, here we go. Okay, we'll get to it in a second. Hold on.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Kim bar Bereshis as a Shemayim shlayayim Bereshis shemu b'shtei rishuyisayim v'rishim bar sasheni. That they don't. The reason they changed it to Elokim bara Bereshis, God created in the beginning, instead of saying in the beginning God created, because the word Bereshis they would think is a kind of deity, and therefore the Bereshis created God. Esa Adam shmikan pagtu ha'imrim shtei rishuyis techsiv nas Adam. When God talks in the plural, so then maybe they're going to think that there's another force that God is consoling with. Tosfos asked the question. I said, this is a good Tosfos, because the Tosfos, again, these things teach us. This comes up till today. I literally was listening to something yesterday. I was listening to some shtusim yesterday about someone trying to explain, what this pasuk means and what that. But everyone's trying to manipulate the text, right? So he says, Elikim bar Bereshis. Tosfos says, Pirsha Kuntras, Shim Kasav Bereshis bar Hayoim Bereshis Shemu. Then if you kept it as is, then the Talmud Melech would think that Bereshis himself is a god. Vishtei Rishuyas, and there's two gods. God forbid. Vikasha Shari Bereshis ain't shem klal. There's no. Why would the Greeks? I mean, Talmud Melech wasn't an idiot, right? He was a cultured person. Why would he ever think that the word Bereshis means a god? And you translate it betchila, and that's the translation. He would read in the beginning, right? If no one opens up an English chumash that says in the beginning God created and thinks that in the beginning is a God. Venerally, so the Rash Tosfos says, one always has to start with the God. That's how they felt. The first, when you open up something, you start with God's name. There's a mocker to this, right? Vimkain. Ilu kosv bereshis koidim hayoim shtei yeshuis ein vateva rishayna have boire echad velikim have sheni mishum hachi hafchula. They wouldn't accept even the word the beginning means the beginning. They say, but I know what you're saying, but you have to start with mentioning God, and therefore, if you're not mentioning God, it means that the word bereshis does mean God, and therefore there's two deities. Okay, so let's just see there's a few more. What we're going to do is we'll do these two footnotes from Rabbi Steinsaltz, and we'll finish the Mishnah. Obviously, not this week, but next week. See the Tosefta. There is an explanation and the significance of the change in our question. The believers in two powers explain that Bereshit refers to a logos, the divine will. Since they will look into the text, into the next level, and totally separate the logos from God, it was necessary to write that God, who is who created the world, and not some other energy. See the translation in the Jerusalem Targum of the word Bereshis as in His wisdom. So you could say in His wisdom, Bereshis means in His wisdom. We're talking about someone else. In His wisdom, He created Elikim. Then it would be that's another energy. Some note that the translation resolves the additional problems. As from the original verse, one could draw that the mistaken conclusion that God has human form. As Adam Salmenu could that God is literally in a human form. Therefore, they wrote in the image and likeness, not in our image and our likeness. See the explanation of the Ibn Ezra commentary in Torah. Okay, before we finish today, let's just do one more. Also, he did Veichal Elikim b'yom hashvi. Veichal Elikim b'yom hashish v'yis b'yom hashvi. Our verse says God finished on the seventh day, and He rested on the seventh day. So then Talmud Melech would say, what are you talking about? He finished on the seventh day means He didn't rest on the seventh day, means you could work on Shabbos. So therefore they changed it, Veichal b'yom hashish, He finished on the sixth day, and He rested on the seventh day. Zachar unekeva baroi v'loy kasav baram. He didn't create them. He wrote about man and woman, meaning to say that there shouldn't be a misunderstanding. They created the chatchila two different. He created them to avoid the impression that there is a contradiction between the verse and God created man, which indicates that God created one person. So he would say them. So he said bara created him in the image of man and woman, as opposed to them created man and woman separately means it's a contradiction. Either He created one person or He created two people. Of course, woman was created, but the question was created later at the beginning. Let's just do the Rashi here. All right, we'll stop here. Let's just go through Julie's points and others. So we have over here probably another conversation, other words and images from the time spirits were carved upon and still that this is why I think the archaeologists and this is pieces from the Muslim in Israel should go on to turning expedition. This is proof. Julie, you want to give us a quick rundown of what you were trying to tell us? Julie, you with us? You have to take off your mute.
Yes. So I was just saying that a lot of the writings that we talk about in the languages, I've had students that pointed things out back when I was teaching art history. But there are all these debates, in politics and protests about people in Israel, and there's proof of it. It's carved upon stele, the stele that existed, and you can carbon date them, and you can put all those in a timeline. That was the only point I was making with that.
So you're trying to
Was
say-
that it's secular. It's not just religious. There's no denying that proof, But that was another conversation, based upon what you're talking about with writing and text. So that's all.
Then
yeah.
if that's the case, let's just quickly do this Rashi here. So it says Veichal b'yem hashishi shlo yemer im kein atzum melach b'Shabbos. Because in our verse it says Veichal b'yem hashvi v'ula yikabel of medrash chacham. He wouldn't accept. Talmud Melech wouldn't say. It's an amazing thing. That what did he create on the seventh day? Ma oilam chaser menucha bas Shabbos bas menucha v'zeh gomer. That's what he finished with. Meaning to say, Talmud Melech would never accept. This is an amazing thing. If anyone benches, what did we say in the Ritzei? That the gift of menucha was only given to the Jewish people. It's such a radical concept of true menucha that Talmud Melech wouldn't even accept it, that menucha was something that was created on the seventh day, not typical creation. That the only thing that was created on the seventh day was the gift of menucha. But menucha is not something that was given to non-Jews, and therefore the non-Jew doesn't really understand menucha on its high level, which is an idea of what really Shabbos is. Zachem nekeva baram b'len kasav baram demashmesh negufim bara kol echad zachem nekeva shtei partzufim lechen kasav baroi. That man, we shouldn't think that God created first man and woman, and then either Chava was a second woman, but God created man in the image of man with the form of man and woman. So they just changed the wording, so we shouldn't make that mistake. It's written in the Jerusalem Talmud that elsewhere that the changes was that the creation of the female was not mentioned at all. Okay, the Yom HaShvi. This is not this. There is nothing distinctive about the seventh day. This footnote is not I read it before, is not in its proper place. Okay, let's stop here, and again, thank you all for joining, and again, hopefully we'll finish the Mishnah next week and we could move on to the next subject at hand. Laila Tov, everyone, take care.
Thank you, Rabbi. And your internet was freezing just a little bit, so
How many times?
just towards this end here, I just noticed it.
I'm sorry, but I have to in the
That's
morning
okay.
it doesn't run well.